Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Whether you're a seasoned captain, a first officer in training, or a dedicated member of the flight crew, you already know that safety and precision are the absolute bedrocks of aviation. So today we're jumping right into a highly specific but absolutely essential operational standard for the Bombardier Q400 aircraft. We are going to master the Q400 bleed configurations. My goal today is to make this information so relatable and structured that you'll be able to memorize it effortlessly for your very next flight.
Okay, let's dive right into our agenda. First, we'll look at the Q400 bleed penalty. Second, the 5 performance limitations. Third, the 1150 temperature factor. And finally, the required bleed procedures.
Section 1. The Q400 bleed penalty, and exactly why those bleeds must be MIN and off. Here is the foundational rule for the entire Q400 fleet. Listen closely. Bleeds must be selected to MIN and off for takeoff and landing. Literally, just memorize that phrase right now, MIN and off. Whenever you're in a ground proximity phase, meaning you're taking off from the runway or you're coming back down to land, this exact switch state is required on the Bombardier Q400. It is a strict rule, guys, not a suggestion.
And you know, this perfectly illustrates exactly why that rule exists. Keeping your bleeds at min and off, that guarantees optimal aircraft performance. However, leaving those bleeds on directly causes a critical deterioration in your performance. Specifically, the source data tells us that with the bleed selector on, both your takeoff climb and your approach or missed approach performance will actively deteriorate because of bleed losses. When you're close to the ground, trying to climb or execute a missed approach, you need absolutely every ounce of performance that Q400 can give you.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 5 performance limitations and mastering the FCOL mnemonic.
Let me introduce you to the FCOL mnemonic, FCOLL. If you ever need to recall the exact 5 limits affected by bleed selection on the Bombardier Q400, just think of FCOL. Let's unpack it effortlessly, all right? F stands for field limit weight, C stands for climb limit weight, which is also known as MAT, O is for obstacle limit weight, the first L stands for landing field limit weight, and that second L stands for landing climb limit weight, or LMAT. FCOL, field, climb, obstacle, landing field, landing climb. By visualizing this super simple acronym, you effortlessly lock in the exact 5 ways the aircraft's performance is affected.
All right, Section 3, the 1150 temperature factor, which is basically the real-world penalty.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the actual math behind the performance data. If for some reason the performance data needs to be determined with the bleeds on, you are instantly hit with a mathematical penalty. The calculation literally requires the use of an assumed outside air temperature that is higher than the actual temperature by exactly 11 degrees Celsius. So the moment those bleeds are on, your aircraft's performance charts have to pretend it's 11 degrees hotter outside than it really is. Because, it's never quite hot enough out there on the ramp, right?
But wait, it doesn't stop there. There's a second half to this rule. That assumed outside air temperature, so the actual temperature plus that 11-degree penalty we just talked about, must absolutely not exceed a maximum cap of 50 degrees Celsius, which is ISA plus 35. This 1150 rule is a severe limitation. It artificially inflates your operating temperature, which severely eats into those FCOL limits we just memorized.
Which brings us to a pretty stark warning from the source documents. The text explicitly states, due to this penalty and in general the prevalence of the high temperature in the Indian subcontinent, the practice of bleeds on takeoff and landing is not recommended. The actual observed data shows that the number of cases where flight crews are accidentally leaving bleeds on during takeoff and landing is actually showing an increasing trend. And that's exactly why this explainer is so vital today. Operating a Bombardier Q400 in high-temperature environments, like the Indian subcontinent, while carrying that 11-degree mathematical penalty is highly, highly inadvisable. Finally, Section 4, required bleed procedures and the sequential steps for the flight crew. To make this completely relatable and incredibly easy to execute, let's anchor it with what we call the min/off trick. Just remember this little phrase. Whenever the ground is near, min/off is here. Any ground proximity phase requires your bleed selector to be set to min, and your bleed switches to be set to off. Both of those critical phases, takeoff and landing, share this exact same strict requirement.
So let's see how this actually builds into your real-world flight deck flow. Here are the 3 unalterable steps from pre-takeoff to post-takeoff. Please don't skip a single one of these. Step 1, before takeoff. Put the bleed selector to min and switches to off. You're going to do this right along with your lineup checklist. Step 2, before landing. Again, put the bleed selector to min and switches to off, doing this right alongside your landing checklist. And step 3, After takeoff. Once you're safely climbing and totally away from the ground proximity phase, you put the bleed switches to on and the selector to norm or max. That's the entire sequence. Simple, right? Min/off for lineup, min/off for landing, on and norm/max after takeoff.
So the absolutely crucial point here is making sure we execute the landing phase perfectly, because as we all know, things happen super fast on approach. Here is a fantastic little trick we call the landing rhyme, to ensure you hit the required altitude gates perfectly. Memorize this. 1,000 to do, 500 to view. 1,000 to do means your landing checklist, putting the selector to min and switches to off, must be completed by 1,000 feet above field elevation, or AFE. 500 to view means you must visually recheck that the bleeds are indeed min and off at exactly 500 feet AFE. 1,000 to do your checklist, 500 to view and verify. It's just a brilliant way to lock those altitude requirements right into your brain.
All right, we have covered the critical why and the exact how of Bombardier Q400 bleed configurations today. We learned the min and off rule. We unpacked that 11-degree real-world penalty, and we armed ourselves with memory tricks to make the whole thing stick. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Have you memorized the FCAL limits and the 3 procedural steps for your very next flight? Think about FCAL. Think about 1,000 to do, 500 to view. Keep these tools in your mental flight bag, fly safe out there, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.